Penance, Eliza Clark's second novel, is extraordinary. This is a remarkable piece of post-fiction, meta-thriller fiction. I'm not entirely sure what to call it. It's wonderfully clever, exhilarating to read, unputdownable, and truly like nothing I've ever read. This is a piece of fiction, a novel written by Eliza Clark, but it is presented entirely as a piece of nonfiction written by a made-up author. That author is named Alec Z. Corelli, and he used to be a journalist, but he was embroiled in controversy, he was cancelled, he turned to writing true crime books. 2 of them were successful, then 2 of them were not. And now a kind of infamous but underreported on crime has caught his eye, and he wants to write a book about it. And that's what Penance is. This is a novel presented as a piece of true crime nonfiction / investigative journalism into the murder of a teenage girl by 3 of her classmates. The murder happened in the fictional town of Crow-on-Sea in North Yorkshire, close to Whitby. It's a sleepy seaside town that used to see quite a bit of tourism, but that has gone into decline over the past few decades. And when the novel begins, Corelli recounts the night of this murder. A 16-year-old girl called Joan Wilson was taken to a seaside chalet by 3 girls that she knew. They tortured her and eventually doused her with petrol and set her alight. It's horrific and a really difficult way to start reading a novel. In fact, I read it with tears in my eyes. That's the setup, is Corelli recounting this horrific act of murder. And then the rest of the book is him digging into the lives and backgrounds of the 3 girls that committed the crime. But before Corelli's account of the crime, which is agonizingly detailed, we actually get a few bits of background information. The first is a very pretentious quote from Truman Capote, and the next is a kind of disclaimer from this fictional publishing house that published Penance, clarifying that when the book originally came out, it actually received a lot of backlash, Corelli received a lot of heat, and it was taken off the shelves. But this publishing house have put it back up exactly as he wrote it. So we know right from the beginning that Corelli is an unreliable narrator, even though this is supposed to be a piece of journalism, a piece of nonfiction, written as a collection of accounts, online journal entries, blog posts, social media posts, interviews, confessions, conversations. How can a narrator be unreliable when all of the information, all of the evidence, it's all contextual, it's all within the book? So that just sits at the back of your mind. Very, very enticing. We get a little bit of background about Corelli, which I've already told you. Then we get the description of the murder, which is kind of written in prose, Corelli's prose. And then we dig into the lives of these people. Corelli makes it clear that one of the last people he interviewed was the victim's mother, but that's where the book begins, with that interview with Joan Wilson's mother. Then the book has 4 main sections, named Girl A, Girl B, formerly known as Girl D, and then Girl C. And these sections are everything that Corelli was able to learn about these 4 girls, because there were 4. I mean, there were 3, but a 4th was initially arrested until they realized that she had nothing to do with the crime. So this is a novel written in an epistolary style about a fictional murder that happened on the night of the Brexit referendum in 2016, and that contextualizes why it was kind of underreported and became something of an infamous murder. When true crime podcasters start to get wind of it and it spreads online, that's when Corelli decides to turn it into a book, which turned out to be perfectly timed for him in terms of sales and publicity. What struck me immediately is the fact that after interviewing Joan Wilson's mother, Corelli interviews these 3 girls, their families, and we learn everything about them. And we learn so little about Joan, except from the perspectives of her own murderers, which just seemed incredibly tactless for Corelli to do. And that's the point. Corelli's not real. He's not our author. Eliza Clark is, and Corelli is under her control. This mistake is obviously done on purpose. And it's surprisingly tough to remember that because you really get drawn into this and read it as nonfiction, read it as true crime. So we learn about these three girls, age 16/17. We also learn a lot about the town. Corelli says that he lived in the town for months upon months while meeting with these people, interviewing them, learning about the local culture and the history, and we get all of that. We learn about the fact that it was initially a Viking settlement, as were so many towns in the north of England. We learn about the Viking who settled there and the legend around him and how his ghost might still haunt the town. We learn about the town's economic background. And girl A, who is the youngest of the girls, her father is kind of a local legend. He's a local capitalist that owns a bunch of buildings. He owns the chalets on the beach. He owns a local hotel, and not long ago he turned from business to politics and ran as the local candidate for the UKIP party. If you're not British and you don't know what UKIP is, they're a far-right party who have a very heavy hand in the reason for Brexit in the first place. So girl A, Angelica, is wealthy. Her dad is infamous. Not liked, but rich and pseudo-famous as a small political figure. And then we learn about girls B and C, Violet and Dolly. Each section on each girl is about 100 pages long, and it paints a very, very vivid picture about local politics, local economics, but mostly the lives of teenage girls. This is something that is so impressive all the way through this novel, is the way that Eliza Clark captures teenage life. It occasionally feels a little bit like the film Mean Girls, but grounded and real and true to life. It looks at the ways in which girls bully each other. It looks at social dynamics and the kind of infighting, group dynamics, pseudo-class system that evolves within schools. It's brilliant. As we go through the book, we learn more and more about Joan, but she's dead. And most of the information we get is from the murderers themselves, or their family members, or their friends. So the level of trust we can have in anything that happens is flimsy. Each of these three girls has something about her that makes her unique. And what they all have in common is the fact that those things that make them unique are pretty secret. For example, Angelica, girl A, seems very simple on the face of it. She's kind of vapid, a bit of a princess character, but she tragically lost a friend in a freak accident at the local swimming pool when she was around 10 years old, about to go into secondary school. And that changed her and made her start to believe in occult things and ghosts. She would even talk to her dead friend as if she was still alive. Girl B, Violet, is a very emo goth girl. She has a Tumblr, she spends all of her time online, she's very introverted. She's obsessed with creepypastas and horror films. She's on Reddit and forums talking about true crime culture. She starts off as a Tim Burton fan and then realizes that's too basic for her, and she upgrades to true crime. And girl C, Dolly, is the one we learn the least about. We learn quite a lot about her family life and the fact that she had a very, very troubled past. But we don't learn a lot about her personality, her hobbies, her interests, how she spends her free time. And as the book progresses, the more you learn about girl A and then girl B, the more you notice the gaps in terms of narrative, information, backstory, and you want to know more about the people you don't know about yet. So by the time I was halfway through Violet's story, I wanted to know about Dolly. Who the hell is Dolly? And I needed to understand more about this girl D, whose name is Jade, and we learn very early on in the book that she's a lesbian, and that must be important for some reason. This is a perfect novelization of true crime. The way that it explores local culture, digs into economics and politics, the history of a place, the legends surrounding it, the ways in which true crime turns not just people but places into these iconic, almost mythical things. Our obsessions with crime and the way that it warps things into, as I said, myth. It really makes you feel guilty for enjoying true crime, which so many of us do these days, including myself. But it also proves the effectiveness of true crime. But as you go on, you realize that Joan is dead, and she was 16 when she was burned alive by 3 classmates, and we don't know anything about her. And everything we learn about her, as I said, is from the perspectives of her own killers. This is monstrous. Dehumanizing. The level of guilt that Eliza Clark forces you to feel almost feels unfair and cruel, but I'm not mad. It's a remarkable book that doesn't just dig into true crime and the effects that it has on our psyches and on popular culture and on our social behaviors, but it's also just an investigation into high school life, especially in the internet age. Things like cyberbullying and what the popular sites that we spend time on do to us. Places like Twitter, Reddit, Tumblr, 4chan, the ways in which so many of us, especially younger people, seem to have dual lives. Our real-life world where we go to school, go to work, spend time with our families, and our online world where we behave entirely differently. A world of creepypastas and fanfiction and shipping. They're such different worlds. The internet is a space all on its own where we are different, but we're also us. And I think that's such a curious thing. These three girls all have online lives as well as offline lives. And Eliza Clark does such a wonderful job of making each of these girls into two separate people, but making that make sense, making it fluid, making it believable, making it logical. She's in their heads in a way that is almost frightening. I fully believed in everything that happened here. Presenting a novel as a piece of nonfiction is nothing new. It's been done 100 times, but Eliza Clark does it so well here, while also turning her fake author, Corelli, into an unlikable person in his own right, even though he kind of takes a back seat because he's writing about other things, not really about himself, although he injects himself into the narrative occasionally. I spoke to this woman, this is what she said, off the record, on the record, blah, blah, blah. I'm obsessed with this book. There's more that I could say. I really tore through it. I could not put it down. And as you read, you just want to know why. I would call this a thriller because you want to understand their motives. You know that Joan died, you know that she was set on fire by three people, and this was a horrific crime that involved kidnapping, torture, and murder. But you want to know why, what were their motivations. But the more time you spend with these three girls, the more you feel guilty because they're being given publicity. They get to tell their stories, and is that fair? Joan doesn't get to tell hers. Oh, this made me think about true crime and the way that we absorb it. This is really astonishing. An incredible book for the internet age. A book about teen life in the UK. Also a book about Brexit and local economics and political attitudes. About internet life versus real life. About true crime. About so many things. Really, really phenomenal. I would call this a masterpiece. Penance is a must-read book. It's truly remarkable. So check it out and subscribe for books.